Good afternoon again. This is Chris White at the California Fuel Cell Partnership, and we're going to get started with our webinar. We have two presenters who are going to speak to you today. The first is Joe Gagliano, who is our infrastructure specialist, followed by Ben Zong, who is our technology manager. So I'm going to change the presenter over so that you're seeing Joe's screen. And
good. I already changed it.
Oh, all right. And Joe, we're ready to go when you are.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. I'm sure that many of you attended the DOE webinar yesterday as well, where they give you an international picture as to where station development is across the world. Today, Ben and I will be talking about where we are and the progress we're making here in California, and where we're going to be going from there. To start, all the stakeholders who are involved in building out stations in California, whether they're government, station developers, or the auto manufacturers, are all working incredibly hard, long hours to get these stations up and running for fuel cell customers. But with that, I wanted to take a little time here to talk about the actual network and put some perspective on where the hydrogen station network is relative to the existing gasoline and diesel retail station market in California. And we have about 24 million gasoline vehicles registered in the state. And supporting those 24 million light gasoline vehicles, we have about 9,000 retail gasoline stations throughout the state of California. And according to the CEC website, from their statistics that they compile on a yearly basis, the top 21% of the retail stations in California sell approximately 50% of the retail fuel by volume. So the 50% of the market, or 50% of the fuel that is dispensed by the existing gasoline retail market is handled by 21% of the network. And that roughly translates to about 1,900 stations. With diesel vehicles, it's even more significant or more pronounced. We've got about 650,000 light-duty diesel vehicles in the state. There are about 3,800 diesel stations throughout the state. But interestingly, again, according to the CEC, only the top 3% of those stations dispense 50% of the fuel for the retail market. And that translates into about 115 stations that serve half that market or dispense half the fuel. So to put that in perspective with hydrogen, I wanted to look at, where does our network need to be? What's the size of the network that we need to get to start providing confidence in the early fuel cell vehicle market? The point at which customers will feel comfortable that there's enough coverage of hydrogen stations across the state that they can feel comfortable buying these vehicles and driving them wherever they like across the state. So NREL in 2012 actually conducted a study and cited some other studies as well. And they looked at this question, kind of that tipping point where the saturation as to where an alternative fuel network needs to be in order for customers to feel confident that they can use their vehicles. And they found in that study plus others that it's roughly 1 in 10 stations, retail stations, needs to have an alternative fuel for them to feel comfortable. So with that translates in California to approximately about 900 hydrogen stations. It would reach that tipping point in the state. Now, where we are in beginning the commercial, what's needed to begin the commercial rollout of vehicles. And when we're talking about commercial rollout here in California, we're talking about automakers, producing for sale and selling vehicles in the thousands. So as the partnership identified in 2012 with its roadmap, with its cluster, destination, and connector stations, we identified that we would need a network of about 68 to 100 stations to start that commercial rollout to support that. And also another number that is intriguing here, if the UC Irvine ran an analysis of their street model to identify they came up with an analysis that identified that 100 strategically placed hydrogen stations could reach 50% of the California's population if you factor in a 10-minute drive to the station. So just wanted to leave that to set the tone there to identify, kind of key factors, key numbers, and milestones in network development as we move now towards talking about where we are now with development of the network. And as of July and August of this year, we've made significant strides since our last webinar, which was in March. At that time, we had 12 open retail hydrogen stations. We now have moved up to 21 retail hydrogen stations. We also have, according to the Air Resources Board last month in their AB8 report, they identified that we have about 330 registered fuel cell vehicles in the state, and that number has probably increased a bit over the past month. But also in the AB8 report, ARB identified, projecting forward in the next few years based on the OEM surveys that they conduct every year, that we're looking at total vehicles on the road, or estimated number of fuel cell vehicles on the road in 2019 of about 13,000 fuel cell vehicles. In 2022, that estimate jumps up to about 43,000 vehicles. And looking at the development phases of the CEC-funded stations in California, we've got about, as people know, we have about 50 stations that are funded in various stages of development. And as you see here in the graph on the chart on the right, we show the 21 open retail stations here as well. We've got 6 non-retail stations that are open, and these are the legacy demonstration stations that have been in operation since for a number of years. And most of these are slated or planned to move to be upgraded to full retail. A couple of them will be closing, but most of them will be moving to full retail. And as you see here, we have about 6 that are fully constructed that are in commissioning right now. And just to identify or look at where we think we'll be at the end of this year, the forecast estimate for the network size at the end of this year is probably we'll have up to about 27 retail stations open for the public. By the end of next year, we expect to have up to 49 stations open and available to the public. This slide shows you, we've got pictures here of the stations, 5 to 10 stations that opened in the past few months since March. We've got, in Southern California, we have the San Juan Capistrano station, Santa Barbara, Playa del Rey is the most recent one by LA Airport, Lake Forest, and Fairfax LA station, which is near CBS Television City in Los Angeles. In Northern California, we've had 5 stations open as well in the past few months, including Mill Valley, Hayward, Saratoga, Campbell, and Lake Tahoe Truckee. And with respect to Lake Tahoe Truckee, there was a station opening this past weekend, which was very well attended. We had 14 fuel cell vehicles there. 30 people from members of the public were in attendance, and we had some very good local radio and TV coverage at that opening as well. So we had people, fuel cell drivers, come from all over the state for that. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we have about 6 stations that are on deck now for moving to retail, full retail. These include Woodland Hills, Hollywood, Riverside, Ontario, Anaheim, and Cal State LA. And the pictures you see here, we've got the ITM power station in Riverside in the upper left, the Ontario hydrogen station there in the middle there. The upper right is the Woodland Hills station, Cal State LA. And in the lower left, we've got the Air Liquide Anaheim station. And that the device you see in front of it is actually the high-step device. So this was taken just a couple days ago. Our high-step device is in Anaheim there this week to conduct testing. Also, to give updates on the other stations, where we are in terms of status of these stations. The Cal State LA station, high-step has been there. They've compiled a report. They're in the process of compiling a report. and we'll be presenting that information to the OEMs for them to review, and then make sure once they're comfortable with that data, they can perhaps move forward on scheduling OEM testing. With regard to the Ontario station, they have AHJ approval to operate. Test fields have been conducted, and last week they were installing the point-of-sale system there. With respect to the Riverside station, they have AHJ approval, and high-step test has been completed and is currently under review. With Woodland Hills, high-step was there as well, and in August, and OEMs are reviewing that as well. And then the Hollywood station, the high-step device is scheduled to be there in the week of September 12th, as of right now, current scheduling. So OEM testing would happen sometime thereafter. So this group of stations is probably the next group that is slated to move to retail once it goes through its full paces with testing by the OEMs. Also, we just closed a round of CEC funding solicitation. The GFO 15605 application deadline was this past August 19th. $33 million is available for capital costs and O&M costs for building stations. This CEC GFO included two competitions. One, the main station competition, identifies these core markets you see here on the right as target areas for development for new hydrogen stations. The solicitation also included an I-5 connector station competition, which identified the Wheeler Ridge, Lubec area and Los Banos area as targeted areas for hydrogen station development to support the Harris Ranch station as well. So we can gain further capacity on the I-5 corridor for customers driving to and from Northern and Southern California. With this, the anticipated notice of proposed awards is slated for October of this year, but there's been a significant response to this solicitation, so that October date may be optimistic. We'll have to see how the CEC handles the solicited proposals that they did receive. And with that, we want to talk a little bit about some of the partnership tools that consumers and drivers can use. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Ben Zong of the partnership.
Actually, before I get started, Chris White, the communications director for the Fuel Cell Partnership, she's going to answer a couple of questions we have online.
Just a couple of questions that came in specifically about this. The first is I have quite a few messages asking if we're going to post this presentation. Yes, the presentation and a recording of the presentation will be on the Fuel Cell Partnership website by tomorrow, and we'll email everyone who attended and registered a link to where you'll find that on the website. A couple of quick questions. The first is, of these stations that we're talking about, are any of them accessible to transit buses? Not right now. These are in gas stations, and transit buses tend to have their own stations that they're using. The exception is at UC Irvine. That station was designed to fill the UC Irvine transit bus, and I believe the Orange County OCTA bus is fueling there as well. But these stations just are designed for passenger vehicles. The next question we had just very briefly is how this plan we're doing now is different from what we started on almost a decade ago. And 10 years ago, we were considering that hydrogen stations would be much more like CNG stations. They would be behind the fence operations, accessible mostly by fleets. As the technology has grown and our learning has grown, we have seen that it is much more efficient and much more likely that they follow a gas station model. And that's the model that we're pursuing today. So with that, I will send it back over now to Ben to talk about some of the tools that you can use.
Great. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Joe. Again, this is Ben Zong with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. I manage all of the online tools for the Fuel Cell Partnership, and I just want to briefly go over two tools that are available for you to find hydrogen stations in California. The first is our station map, which can be found at cafcp.org/station map. This is a location-based tool, and what that means is that you can put your zip code in the box at the top, and once you hit go, the map will zoom in to that location based on your zip code. The list on the right will also be modified based on that zip code. You can also filter the list of stations by when the station is expected to open by using the filter by button in the center there. And then also, these stations, Joe mentioned earlier about the GFO stations that will be coming online soon. Once we have stations with established addresses, we will start adding those stations onto the station map. But you can see all those stations by clicking on the download stations button on the bottom left. And you'll see them at the very bottom labeled as establishing site control. We update this list every week, and then we post it onto, against that link at the bottom left, the download stations button. So next slide, Joe. The second tool that I wanted to briefly mention is our station status site. This is located at m.cfcp.org. This site allows you to figure out when a station is online or offline. And I just want to briefly touch on two changes that we've made to the site. The first, when stations are when they're first added to our site, we label it with the label new. And you'll see that with, as an example, the Playa del Rey station on the bottom there. After 30 days, if the station meets specific criteria, we then remove that new label. Next slide, Joe. The second change we've made to the site is our information icon. So you'll see that for UC Irvine, for example, to the right of the two statuses, we have the information icon. When you click on that, it takes you to a more detailed page with a bright orange box at the top. So this box, it typically stores information that is related to fueling. So for instance, if we know that the station is going to be in maintenance, we put that information in the box, as well as when that station is expected to come back online. The information that you see on this site is also being shared with majority of the automakers. And so for instance, if you're a Toyota Mirai driver, in your station locator app, you'll be able to see some of this information as well. And with that, Joe, I give it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I just wanted to add a couple notes here about the Hollywood station. It is fully operational right now, and First Element expects it to be open in October. So we'll look forward to that one coming online as well. With that, just want to say in closing, this is a relatively short presentation, but I expect a lot of questions after this. We are seeing a lot of progress, and you're starting to see real retail station growth. And want everyone to take away from this that the commercial market is it's begun, and it's only going to improve as we go forward here. All parties, the government, station developers, and the OEMs are learning and refining the process to get retail stations open, and that's the partnership is very actively involved in this as we're getting stations open, and part of that refining process as well. With respect to government, funding is in pipeline, and there's government commitment to reach 100 stations, as we mentioned earlier. And now industry is also starting efforts to address medium and heavy-duty fuel cell vehicles. And I wanted to let everyone know that the partnership has developed an action plan that is in the process of being finalized right now and should be published shortly. And with that, that concludes our formal remarks. So let's open it up to questions.
All right, thanks, Joe. And Ben, I have quite a few questions that have come in. A lot of questions have been answering as we go through because they're very specific to that requester. The first, Ben, to talk a little bit about cost. When you show the station updates, how real-time are those station updates on cost?
Yes, so currently the statuses are reported in 15-minute increments. We are moving towards working to get the status in real time in roughly 1-minute increments, and so definitely look for that in the coming future here, shortly.
A point of clarification, Joe, is the Hollywood station open now, or Yes or no?
No, it's operational. It's now in the process of moving from operational to fully open retail.
So maybe you could explain just really quickly what the difference between operational and open. What's involved with that?
Yeah, getting a station to operational status is essentially building the station. All the parts and equipment are and protocols are in place to fuel a vehicle. But what has to happen after that? Once the station is built, then it's also got its AHJ, all its approvals from local authorities having jurisdiction. DMS has to come in and test and make sure, do the metrology testing, and has to get a metrology sticker from DMS. Also, it has to have a point of sale system installed. So once all the equipment is installed at a station, that's when you have the station developer will communicate to the auto manufacturers that they can come in and schedule their own confirmation tests at that station. And so once the OEMs go and do those tests, they do their own testing to make sure the protocols and all the protocols are met, and the station operates safely for their vehicles and their customers. Then an OEM will say that they will now release the station to their customers. And yet, in order for a station to move to open retail, a minimum of 2 automakers have to have given their approval to the station.
And Joe, there's some final permits that have to be issued by the city as well, some certificates of occupancy.
Correct.
So
Correct.
It's not just, yes. So
no, there are actually. Yeah, I'm sorry, I talked earlier. There are actually many permits that you have to get, but ultimately you have to get the permit to operate.
So it's similar to a friend of mine here is opening an ice cream shop, and he's making ice cream right now, but he can't sell it yet because he hasn't had all of his final tests and inspections, and I can't wait every day. Joe, another question for you. The San Ramon Station is listed on the under construction on our station map, but you didn't show it on the coming soon slide. Can you talk a little bit about coming soon and under construction?
Yeah, so the San Ramon is progressing. It's just probably just right behind that group that I mentioned here. So it could have been included in that group, and it was just left, just left off. But it's right behind the group that we're talking about. So it's moving towards operational.
Okay. Yeah, and what we've seen so far is the things that were listed as coming soon are built, and they're going through this final testing. And so I imagine on our next station webinar, which will be later this fall, you're going to see a whole new group of those that are open, and we'll be talking about the ones that are finished with construction and are getting ready to go next. I kind of collapsed my box there by mistake. One question I have a couple of times is the big one: how much does the fuel cost, and how do you see that changing in the future?
Excellent question. The average fuel price, kind of I identified a number of stations. This isn't for the entire network. So the average price right now is probably around $15 a kilogram, give or take, for the station network in California. And the reason that the price is where it is because this is the early market. There's, you've got a low number of vehicles on the road. You've got not a lot of throughput. I don't think most of the stations, are not at capacity right now in terms of dispensing. So that's the kind of the initial market price. As the fuel cell vehicle numbers increase on the road and throughput increases at each of these stations, we should see the price start to come down per kilogram. And those prices that I mentioned were for H70.
And stations set their own prices, correct? There's not one entity that's saying this is what the price is for hydrogen everywhere?
That's right. Each of the station developers set their own prices.
I have loads of questions here, you guys. Bear with me for just a minute. Let me go up to a couple of more general questions. We've had a few people ask, what are the, if you could call the 3 biggest lessons learned in this first 21 stations for how to get them in the ground faster, what would those 3 big ones be?
There are a lot of lessons that I'm sure all the station developers could tell you over a beer. But I think some of the biggest lessons is just you've got to start you've got to start early with not only getting a commitment from a property owner and a station operator, but you've got all the city very early in the process to not only identify who you are and what you're doing, but walk them through the plan. A lot of, many of these cities and jurisdictions are not used to permitting such applications with hydrogen. So there's an education process that goes along with that. So that's part of the reason why you need to start pretty early with each of the cities and meeting with the permitting and planning officials to kind of educate them and bring them up to speed with what you're doing, and then go forward from there. Those are I think the biggest lessons. And then always expect the unexpected.
One thing that's important for our folks to know too is that the Governor's Office of Business Development, along with CACP and its members, created a permitting guidebook that has a lot of lessons learned and best practices. It's on the GoBiz website, it's on our website, but we'll make sure that we have a link to that in the follow-up email that we send to everyone. It's really a terrific resource of how to move as quickly as possible based on what we know today. Joe, you also touched briefly on getting to the 100 stations. Can you talk a little about the government commitment to reach 100 stations? Or we also have Andrew Martinez from the Air Resources Board on the phone, and that might be a great question for Andrew as well, to surprise him. Joe, you start while Andrew's thinking.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so the state, through signing of AB8 a few years ago, identified and committed to putting forth or authorizing money, $20 million a year for 10 years to help build out the hydrogen station network to help get the state to that 100 station mark. So I can tell you that when that did pass, I think that gave a lot of confidence to the industry stakeholders that government was committed to this, and I think that's been demonstrated in the past several months, where so many stations have come online so quickly, and the network is developing out as we see it. That commitment was very, very important. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to say that the process for that it's really led by CEC for the funding. As Joe mentioned earlier, the most recent solicitation just closed on August 19th, and there was it looks to be a good amount of response, and we'll have to see going forward what the what comes out of that solicitation. But CEC and ARB do work cooperatively with the partnership, with with GoBiz, with the auto manufacturers, the station providers, everybody who's really a stakeholder in this industry to best plan for these solicitations and to try to identify where the greatest needs are. So yeah, I just wanted to add that a little bit.
So we do have questions, but I'm going to answer real quick here about when do we think the next GFO would come out. That's a total crystal ball question. Not even the Energy Commission knows at this point when they'll issue the next one. So I'm sorry we can't give you a more definite answer than that. I can tell you that as soon as we hear whisperings about it, you will know about it if you are subscribed to our mailing list. And so I really encourage, if you have not done so, to go to the Fuel Cell Partnership website, subscribe to our mailing list. We think junk email is socially unfriendly, so we don't do that. But if you want to be in the know about this stuff, that's the way to do it. Joe, another big general question too. Can you talk a little bit about how these stations that are open get their hydrogen?
Yeah, most of the stations that are open retail right now have gaseous hydrogen delivered to the station, much like you have with tube trailers. You know, in a similar fashion that you have gasoline and diesel delivered to gas stations. As the stored hydrogen on site depletes, they're scheduled to bring in gaseous hydrogen to replenish that. With some of the stations, mainly West Sacramento and San Juan Capistrano, they actually store liquid hydrogen on site. So liquid hydrogen is delivered to those stations, and what happens, the liquid hydrogen is then kind of vaporized and pressurized and then put into a vehicle. So we've got a few more stations that are coming online that will have liquid hydrogen as well. But you also have a couple stations like Ontario and Riverside that are using electrolyzers that electrolyze water. Right? Again, hydrogen is produced on site. It's produced on site and stored and dispensed and pressurized to deliver into vehicles.
I'm going to knock out just a couple of other questions. Can we provide a list of the manufacturers installing hydrogen equipment? Yes, it's on the Fuel Cell Partnership website. I'll make sure that that's in the email link that we send to all of you. We are also going to answer a few questions on behalf of Ben here. You can chime in, Ben. We are constantly working on the hydrogen station map, adding more information to it. It's built off of a database, so some of the information that we are hoping to add by the end of this year is who built the station, how much renewable content, where is their fuel coming from. If you have things that you'd like to see added, I encourage you to email Ben. His email address is at the bottom of the station map page, and you can hit him up that way. The same goes for those ideas of changing the shape and color of the icons, the ways that right now we display on that mobile website, we display the stations alphabetically. That was great when we had 6 stations. As we get to 20, that's not working so well. So we're working on that as well. And for the answer about when you go to the station map, it asks you to type in a zip code. You can also type in a city or even a state. You don't really need the zip code, but we find a lot of people want to see what's closest to them. So it was just a way to geo-position the map. We wanted it to geo-position based upon your computer, but we found out that, like us here at the Fuel Cell Partnership in West Sacramento, our computers show up in a different city, and so that wasn't working correctly. Joe, can you also quickly talk about the status of some of the stations in the other states? This isn't just a California thing.
Yes, there are 12 stations that are going to be developed in the Northeast, in the I-95 corridor between New York and Boston. That's through a partnership between Air Liquide and Toyota. And I think a couple months ago, there was an announcement that the first 4 stations station locations had been identified. So keep looking at the news to see how those stations are developing as well. And in addition, a station, not a retail station, but a station that just did open up in Washington, D.C. With the National Park Service, I believe, in DOE, joint effort there. So.
Andrew, I'm going to throw a question to you. For those of you who haven't met Andrew, he is the one who's in charge of a geospatial analysis tool that does a little prediction on where new hydrogen stations might be really useful. Andrew, I have a lot of questions here that says, do you plan to have a station here at this off-ramp in this city? There are probably 14 questions that say that. So can you talk a little bit about how CHIT works and how you use that to figure out where new ones might go?
Okay. So we actually have a tool that we developed here called CHIT. It stands for the California Hydrogen Infrastructure Tool. It's a geospatial analysis tool built in the ArcGIS software, and it looks at a number of demographic factors as well as the coverage provided by the stations that we currently know of, the ones that are currently funded, whether they are operating or they're still in process of being built. That tool essentially weighs the coverage against the strength of the market based on those demographic indicators and finds where the biggest gap is. We have a lot of information about this tool on our ARB website, and the URL is a little bit long, so I'll probably coordinate with the partnership staff to see if we can get that URL out to the webinar attendees. But some of the things that it looks at are prior alternative fuel vehicle registrations, income, education attainment, those kinds of factors that might be indicators of the first early adopter market. We are also looking currently at how we can integrate traffic information, and one of the key things that we're looking at is that this tool tries to put stations near the communities where the first early adopters are likely to live. We've seen that a kind of prevalent paradigm is that, essentially in order to increase the adoption of the vehicles, there needs to be a very prominent presence of the vehicles near where people live, near where those early adopters live. And so that's kind of what the goal is with that tool, is to identify those areas and then find those areas that aren't as well covered as they need to be. So yeah, I will coordinate with the partnership staff to make sure that we get some of that information to the webinar participants.
So one question always leads to another, and we do have a lot of questions about what are we thinking about in the future? What's the size, the storage capacity? Are we going to look for redundancy or for stations in new markets? Capacity? Those are all questions that the Fuel Cell Partnership is working together to answer now. I can't tell you the answer to that because we really want to evaluate. We only have 21 stations open. We need to evaluate how those are being used. And together as a group in this next 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, we will be looking at all of those answers. Twice a year we have an open to the public meeting where we're talking about some of these larger issues. Again, we make sure that everybody who's on our mailing list knows about those. The next one will be in early October in Sacramento, and it's a great opportunity to come in and add some input or ask some questions. And I know that's tricky when you're outside of the United States, but we will certainly keep those conversations open. Oh, I have a really specific question on Jennifer. The man in the mustache is a Santa Barbara resident in the picture. Oh, it's a city council member from Santa Barbara. That was the Santa Barbara station opening. Let me run back through some of these. We've also had quite a few questions come in about heavy-duty vehicles, and heavy-duty vehicles themselves, transit buses are already in operation. We also are just about to release a medium and heavy-duty action plan that is addressing the needs of heavy-duty vehicles, including fueling and manufacturer incentives, and we're just getting started on that work. And so you'll see that come out from us in a couple more weeks. We've also had some questions about, are we seeing a future where we have more vehicles than fuel? According to the Air Resources Board projections that came out in June, that's the picture right now. So again, that's part of that planning process that we do as the Fuel Cell Partnership, is to get ahead of that problem and make sure that there won't be more vehicles at available stations. Last question here was about, is there accurate, I'll leave this for you, Joe, accuracy in dispensing. If you're getting if the dispenser says a kilogram, how do you know you get a kilogram?
How do you know you get kilograms?
Yeah. Well, are the dispensers rated for accuracy?
Oh yeah, that's part of a station cannot open unless it's been tested by DMS within a certain tolerance class. And most of these stations, so you can't get a sticker unless you meet the tolerance class, and I think it's right now it's 5, 2, and 10%. So most of the stations, my recollection is that most of the stations are coming in under the 5% threshold. So that the performance of these stations has been very, very good.
So I think maybe the short answer to that is they get a sticker on there from the Division of Measurement Standards, just like every gas dispenser or diesel dispenser does, and that ensures the accuracy.
Yeah, a hydrogen station cannot open unless they get that metrology sticker from DMS, and they have to be accurate. So.
We've also had a bunch of questions about specific dates on stations. We don't know those because it's really out of our control. We can give you an estimate of when we think it will happen, but like anything else, you know, there could be a rain delay on construction. We could be waiting a week for a permitting official to come along. So we can only go with approximate dates. On our station map, you can sort the stations by approximate dates and see that it's expected to be in Q3 or Q4 of 2016 or Q1 of 2017. We try to get as close as possible, but really a lot of that is just out of everybody's hands. On our station map website, I know I keep going to that, there's a download link at the bottom of the page. Every Monday we update that spreadsheet with the latest status of the hydrogen station. So that's the way you can see really what's going on with them, and it will say something like the equipment's been delivered, or the hole has been dug, or we're waiting for the DMS permit, and that gives you a good idea of where it is in that process. Plans for Las Vegas. We would all of us here who work for the Fuel Cell Partnership, we all want to drive to Las Vegas. So yes, we're hoping that will happen.
Yeah, I want to jump in here, Chris, if I could.
Yes.
Yeah, we did talk about the target area, the core market areas that CEC identified in their solicitation that just closed. Las Vegas is not on there, but there are station developers that are planning to develop stations in California that that are not using Energy Commission money. They're actually using U.S. Department of Energy money through a separate loan guarantee program. So there are other station developers out there who are have more flexibility in where they can locate stations. So we'll hopefully see in the next 6 months or so where these other stations, non-CE stations, are actually placed and located.
Okay, I'm just reading through to see if I missed anything. We have probably 140 questions on the screen. So I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything big. I did have one question from some of our folks who are involved with this about how high step is working. Good experience, anything more that needs to be done with it?
The question is regarding high step?
Yep. How's high step been working out? Any more that needs to be done in that area?
The high step device it has gone through a shakedown period. It's being used more and more now at stations in conjunction with OEM confirmation testing. So it's supporting that role. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is to have stations, the station confirmation process or commissioning process either done by a third party or take the automakers out of that equation. And that's where the high step device comes in. It's starting us down that path to get us to where a third party will confirm a station for operation in the state. That having been said, we have one high step device that's in use in California. California is a big state. It's been mainly down here in Southern California, but it's now its schedule includes going up to Northern California as well. So I can safely say that there's probably a need for at least a second high step device. And we've learned a lot from using it right now, and I'm sure there's a list of improvements and enhancements that the operators have in their back pockets. So.
So I know that there are still a number of questions here. A lot of them are very specific about a building code or how our standard works. So let me just take one more little quick look to see if I got all of the pretty general ones. Do you know, Joe, the name of the DOE loan guarantee program?
I believe it's Title 17. That's all I know about it. I think it's my understanding, don't quote me, but it's I think it's the same. I think Tesla has tapped into this program to get loan guarantees for some projects that they're working on. So it is out there.
Okay, we'll include that link in our follow-up email too.
Yeah.
We have some questions about when do we expect the NOPA. That's the Notice of Proposed Award from the Energy Commission. Best we can say is fall. Again, we just don't know. It's kind of a crystal ball question. And the last question we have here is one I would like to wrap up with, because people always ask this. How about producing hydrogen at home, Joe?
There are a couple companies in the U.S. that actually make small electrolyzer units that are for that very purpose. So that is, other companies are thinking about that, and so they'd have to, I know that some of the companies are in discussions with the auto manufacturers to make sure that they're compatible with the fuel cell vehicles, but there are companies looking into that right now, so we should see some developments in the next, within the next year or so on that path.
All right. So with that, we have a lot of questions to continue following up with. We'll follow up with some of you by email, and I've been typing you messages that will follow up with you directly. All of these questions we'll summarize and post the answers to as well, so you'll have them with all of the meeting materials. In the meantime, I do encourage you to reach out to us at info@cafcp.org if you have other specific questions. And we had one great suggestion in our questions, and that is that in our next update, to include the automakers to talk a little about their rollout plan. We do have Toyota with their vehicles available now. Honda vehicles are coming soon. Within I think they're starting their rollout events in September. We expect to see cars from Mercedes next year, and so we will invite all of our automakers to join us. And one last question, is Volkswagen a member of the Fuel Cell Partnership? Yes, they are. So, is BMW a partner of the Fuel Cell Partnership? BMW has never been a member, but we are hoping to welcome them to membership in the next year. So with that, we're going to thank everybody. We appreciate you using your lunchtime, or those of you calling in from Europe using your nighttime. And we will be talking to you again in a few months.